Edgar Hoover, the first director of the FBI. On a sunny day in 1895 in a crowded row house in Washington, D.C., a baby named John Edgar Hoover croaked with his curiosity about the world. Hoover grew up in a typical middle-class family, though his mother worked hard to bring him up, teaching him ahead of time how to manage his own personal life, which gave him the skills he would later need to run the FBI with, skills that completely trumped kindergarten. There's no denying that his infancy outlined the trajectory of his subsequent life, leading the world's top investigative agency. Yes, I'm referring to the one that for a while he reduced to a private club, the FBI. Young J. Edgar Hoover was a standout in school. He was always so serious, whether it was raising his hand to ask a question in class or on the soccer field after school. And, of course, he went on to become very good at determining which were his teammates and which were his enemies in the larger context of society. New to the job market, Hoover landed a low-level position at the Department of Justice through his meticulous work ethic and conspicuous enthusiasm, which at times felt slightly overdone, which for him was akin to a baby just learning to walk suddenly being able to run a marathon. Because of his meticulous attention to detail and adherence to rules and regulations, he was tasked with assisting in the cleanup of unfunded cases at the tender age of only 21, a daunting task unimaginable to most people. Hoover, however, literally worked his way through all the skepticism, even hanging onto a slew of coworkers who looked down on him, so to speak. Through his straight personality and uncompromising attitude, he ultimately lights the way to the FBI director's door. With a face as if pimples never existed, a determination to fight the forces of evil alone, and a civil servant's outfit that lacked any human touch, 29-year-old Hoover walked through the door of the FBI. He was immediately appointed director. Although Hoover always looked like an overly strict high school principal, his methods of work made the gangsters look like enemies. He reorganized the Criminal Investigations Division and set up the modern forensic systems that are so familiar to us today, from chemical analysis labs to crime suppression squads to fingerprint processing. Yes. It's a wonder how he came up with such ideas that didn't have anything to do with cooking and frying. Herbert Hoover handled many notable cases during his 48-year-long tenure as FBI director, and one of the most notable was the Lindbergh child abduction case. On March 1, 1932, Charles Augustus Lindbergh II, the 20-month-old son of famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, was kidnapped from his bed in his New Jersey home. The case immediately drew national attention and eventually pulled Hoover and his FBI into the investigation. Over the next 2 months, the kidnappers demanded and received a ransom of $50,000. But despite this money, Charles Lindbergh II was not handed over to his kidnappers as expected. A little over a month later, a truck driver found the remains of a young boy on the side of the road a few miles from the Lindbergh home. The little boy was identified as none other than Lindbergh II. After this, Hoover was determined to find the culprits of this innocent child's murder. After a thorough investigation of the ransom payment, the FBI quickly tracked down a string of serial numbers linked to the paper products. This meant that they could trace where the bills had been used. So, over the next few years, they searched the entire United States and managed to track down a portion of the ransom money. In 1934, a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann tried to pay for gasoline with a $10 bill from a ransom bill. The clerk noticed the number of the bill and wrote down Hauptmann's license plate number. The tip eventually led the FBI to Hauptmann. After Hauptmann's arrest, the FBI found more ransom bills in his home and discovered that he still had ransom bills in the vault where he kept them. Hauptmann was then declared the kidnapper and murderer of the Lindbergh children and was sentenced to death by hanging in 1935. On April 3, 1936, Hauptmann was executed at Trenton State Prison in New Jersey. This event helped build the FBI's reputation for excellence on a national level and established Hoover's image in the public mind as a serious law enforcement officer. Another case of great importance and recognized success for Herbert Hoover and the FBI was undoubtedly the hunt for the admitted mad bomber. This case exemplified how Herbert Hoover utilized a new scientific approach to forensics to gain credibility for the FBI, while establishing his federal law enforcement agency as a force to be reckoned with when dealing with insider violations of the law. The recognized mad bomber was in fact George "Matt" Matson, who between 1940 and 1956 built and sent 16 of his own mail bombs throughout the U.S. Motivated by his dissatisfaction with world development and the Industrial Revolution. This series of bombings made him the most feared criminal in all of America. The bombs were usually hidden in wooden crates, cheap boxes, or drawers in men's restrooms and came with some compelling proclamation. In 1950, Hoover authorized the FBI to conduct an investigation codenamed Unabomb, University and Airline Bomber, and the FBI utilized a large number of personnel and resources to investigate the case, including bomb-making experts and a special group known as the Special Task Force on the Mad Bomber. The FBI utilized a wide range of personnel and resources to investigate the case, including experts in bomb-making and a specialized team called the Mad Bomber Task Force. By analyzing the bombs, as well as subtle and intricate clues, such as a rare paper and typewriter font, the FBI was able to close in on the suspect. A group of experts conducted a personal bootstrap modeling analysis of Matson's psychology and writing style, the first time the technique had been applied to a criminal investigation. However, the most critical deadlock-breaking clue came from Matson's own brother, David. When Matson sent his 35,000-word charter to various media outlets and asked them to publish it on the front page, David recognized his brother's unique writing style and contacted the police. As a result, on April 3, 1996, the FBI arrested Matson, who was living in a cabin deep in the Montana mountains. This case proved Hoover's ability to utilize scientific and psychological detection techniques in major cases and solidified the FBI's commitment to the American public's responsibility for crime defense. Throughout his illustrious career, Herbert Hoover's efforts to hunt down and eliminate criminal organizations were a test of courage and ingenuity. One of the most famous of these was the targeting of Chicago's most notorious criminal gang, Al Capone. During the Prohibition era of the 1920s and 1930s, Al Capone was a major leader in Chicago's illegal market, operating in the smuggling, trafficking, and illegal manufacture of alcohol. But their crimes went beyond that, including bribery of public officials and even a veritable Valentine's Day massacre. Hoover was outraged by this disregard for the law. Although many FBI cases and investigations at the time were based primarily on federal offenses, such as interstate bank robberies, Hoover saw a possible way to go after Capone through his taxes. In 1931, Hoover urged a special agent to find out that Capone had not paid federal income taxes by digging deeper into his financial records. At the time, this was seen as a less important offense, but it gave the FBI the opportunity to arrest Capone. Later, the FBI, with the assistance of his financial advisors, found Carbone's bookkeeper, which led them to years of tax evasion and fraud. Then, Special Agent Frank J. Wilson, after careful conversations with Carbone's bookkeeper, gathered enough evidence and filed charges against Carbone. In October 1931, Al Capone was convicted on 5 counts of non-payment of federal income tax and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He developed syphilis while serving his sentence and died in 1947. This successful manhunt demonstrated Hoover's commitment to a determined fight against crime and confirmed the FBI's place in American criminal history. It not only led to the fall of Al Capone, but also weakened the influence of organized crime throughout the United States. It was his indestructible perseverance that made Hoover synonymous with the FBI. His successes and talents are like a big candy bar that makes one forget the occasional dictatorship he displays. His obsession with fighting crime and keeping the country safe almost makes even underwear a hiding place for treasonous criminals. When it comes to the American mob, Hoover's name can't be avoided. His FBI became his weapon against the forces of evil. Those mafia members who acted in the shadows always seemed to be no match for Hoover's eagle-like eyes. Their secret activities were always revealed by him, one by one, as if he had uncovered a worn-out magician's trick. However, just as there are always atoms and molecules, the warrior of justice has his own dark side. Under his rule, America felt pressured to even think about making private small talk, fearing that their comments might hit his minefield, causing him to stare at them with his trademark glowering expression. Perhaps that's the height of him, a classic Hooverian situation. Defender of justice, yet also a voyeur into people's lives. And yet, there he was, standing at his golden pinnacle, the tiny Roman emperor in charge of his FBI paradise, and one could only look at him with a horrified smirk. Those who say that the public must be impartial have obviously never taken a serious look at J. Edgar Hoover, the titular head of the military, who not only polished his eyes in public, but secretly wore the private mask of favoring his friends and family. The FBI under his rule was an unbreakable fortress, so to speak, or perhaps his private collection. In the eyes of this leader who loved to create a family-friendly atmosphere, the public sector was just his future private hunting ground. Coincidentally, right after he took office, he introduced a rule that all FBI employees would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can imagine the scenario. Suppose you one day, like you've gone through the motions and succeeded in joining the FBI, and then realize that you also have to sign a keep-quiet contract promising never to reveal everything you know. Freedom of speech is like being made into an ice skate and sliding into a black hole. Hoover then took full advantage of this power to turn his men into his obedient puppies. Remembering that the FBI was not only a tough police academy, but also a large private junior high school where teenagers had to make all kinds of promises among their supporters in order to be elected class president, Hoover, the fox in the skin of impartiality, is adept at catching prisoners and making the rounds under this basic law. Moreover, Hoover's play on the image card is masterful. He has successfully portrayed himself as the protector of the nation and the sworn enemy of the forces of evil. With his elegant center-parted hairstyle, the dutiful smile that always hangs at the corner of his mouth, and even his work attire, which is always in a suit, he looks like an image of a leader that everyone looks up to. Such an image, so that under his rule, people are afraid of but love the FBI, and the FBI more firmly in accordance with Hoover's ideas. It must be said that Hoover can be a real family court masterman. He's made a public resource into his family's fan folder, and he's expanding his private memories into the nation's history. It's a unique way of playing the game, just like Batman, who manipulates countless jokers, fighting crime while skillfully utilizing his power to happily submerge himself in his private FBI world. There's a saying that goes, if you want someone to play with you, first you have to have a good idea, and then you can bring everyone into the picture. For Hoover, that good idea was to protect national security, and his everybody was undoubtedly the American public and his FBI family. First of all, it is important to realize that Hoover served as FBI director during a crazy time when the mafia was running rampant and communist sentiment was spreading. Of course, everyone knows that rounding up the forces of evil and pursuing thought criminals rank among the top two of the FBI's daily tasks, as important as eating and sleeping. Hoover, however, elevated them to an unprecedented level, becoming the theme of virtually every house party he hosted. Hoover had long denied the existence of organized crime, especially the influence of the mafia in the United States. However, he was forced to change his position after a large number of mafia members were arrested by the police in the 1957 Appalachian Conference and widely reported. He then began to focus on breaking up the mafia. He took a number of actions, including sending special operations teams to track and investigate mafia activities and pushing the legislature to pass laws to more effectively combat organized crime. Hoover led the FBI in arresting and prosecuting mafia members using criminal prosecutions and related legal tools such as anti-collusion and anti-racketeering laws. He also began to utilize more modern investigative techniques like electronic surveillance to gather evidence. These efforts put tremendous pressure on the mafia and weakened them nationwide. In 1963, a high-ranking mafia member, Joe Valachi, agreed to testify in an investigation that exposed the inner workings and activities of the mafia. Valachi's testimony was widely reported, revealing to the public the seriousness of organized crime and further strengthening Hoover's resolve to crack down on the mafia. It should be noted that although public opinion and the public attitude of the government changed under Hoover's leadership, the mafia was not completely eradicated. Herbert Hoover made a noticeable contribution to the fight against the mafia, But the problem remained and continued to grow in the years after his death. However, his work did put a great deal of pressure on the mafia and revealed the FBI's enduring resolve to become widely recognized and respected throughout the country. He also developed a series of programs and operations to combat the mob and communism at every turn, from the Tennessee mountains of Louisiana to the city of Chicago. Whether it was the manipulation of mob bosses' secret deals, those involving assassinations, drugs, money laundering, and all the crimes of unfair competition, or the communists' endless plots involving coups d'état, subversion of the government, and jeopardization of national security, he exposed them all with the same aplomb as if he had been snapping up TVs at a bee shopping festival. Come to think of it, this is his own house party, and he uses national security as the theme of the party, and all the work he does is not only to fight crime and keep the peace, but also to carry out his house party with more and more flavor. The crime roundups weren't always so special. But under Hoover's reign, the family-oriented party becomes immensely appealing. Every victory celebrated with a toast in the minibar, every briefing on the capture of a gangster, every transcript of the interrogation of a communist reads like a touching family story of Hoover's relentless fighting spirit and unwavering determination to protect the country. But just as every family has its own special family culture, Hoover's FBI family cultivated a special family creed that is, the more you mess up, the more I'm going to mess with you. The techniques he used depended on the severity of the crime, from open arrests to undercover operations, from courtroom showdowns to backroom interrogations, and continued to make his mark on American history. Every Red Friday dinner, they sit around and talk about the latest case, drink whiskey, and laugh at the absurdity of the world. It's no exaggeration to say that Hoover made protecting national security a family theme, just as he made eating grapes without spitting them out a family tradition. He made not only his family members proud, but America proud of their contributions. To him, the FBI was not only a great law enforcement team, it was also his family, and together, shoulder to shoulder and close together, they protected the United States of America and defended the rights of its people. But who would believe that Hoover, the seemingly serious director, in his private life, like any other kid, has his own gadgets, and one could even say that his secrets are more diverse and rich than those of other kids. His secrets involve all sorts of exciting and dazzling things, including a private theater, a table of choice wines, and some mermaids in such company that can't be mentioned here. That said, when the power falls into his palm, people begin to notice his every move, every decision, every behavior, as if a close-up camera has been trained on him. The result of his kind of real-life superhero-esque influence coupled with his secret hobbies is like unique cuisine that can only be savored at his own abusive restaurant. As you might guess, he has no qualms about manipulating power. He's like a kid who's been given a brand new toy car and just wants to ride it happily around his family's expansive lawn. In fact, he regarded power as his personal toy, which he abused at will. On one occasion, he eavesdropped on a mobster's private call on the grounds of protecting national security. At the time, he was sharing a walking ball, enjoying his Spanish wine, and then glancing at the baby blue phone as if checking to see if his building was leaking. It's almost as if it's all natural, not at all like an invasion of another person's privacy. Another time, a former ambassador publicly questioned his policies in front of him. Do you think he'll lash out? Or begin to hold a grudge? Not really. Instead, he led the way by offering the ambassador a glass of champagne and saying cheers. And then the ambassador found himself in a boring position that had nothing to do with his career. All those lofty principles, all those unquestionable morals, all of them were distilled into a bitter black cup of coffee in the course of his abuse of power, which could even be said to be the biggest brand of his company. He's that big squid in the deep sea, unleashing his charms at will and then happily playing and playing. That's what he is, Hoover, a man who manipulates power as freely as he breathes, and while his private life and course of power abuse is slightly humbling in its darkness, his journey to power is by all accounts a magnificent epic, full of breathtaking splendor and twists and turns. That's it for this installment. Thanks for watching.